right, here we go. Here we go. So recording in progress, episode 31. And today, 3-1. And this is our 25th together, Katie. I just wanted to say that. So today we have a guest, and his name is Johnny Fiorica. And as you can see from his background, he has his own podcast.
Yeah, like legit.
Legit, like super legit. Like I said before in our last episode, I was telling Katie, we are a baby podcast compared to you. You're all like polished and stylized, and you have like a producer, which is super fancy. It's me and Kate. So like we are,
but the passion's there. The passion's there.
The passion's there. We are raw and unedited, and basically 50% of our podcast is a blooper reel, or it could be one. So like that's pretty much how we roll. But okay, so Johnny, thank you for coming on.
Sure.
Why don't you introduce yourself and give your background to our audience and let us know, just give us your stats because they're pretty impressive.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on, ladies. First of all, don't be impressed by our podcast, because if it wasn't for our super producer, Danny Agnew, me and David, my co-producer, David Simpson, would not look that smart. So thank you for the kudos. All the kudos goes to Danny. Second of all, I was a detective with the Rochester, New York Police Department. I served 30 years. I actually retired it's been a little over a year ago. I was a detective with the RPD, retired 30 years, like I said. I worked all over the place. I worked street, like uniform patrol. I worked undercover narcotics. I worked and got promoted, sent back to the street to kind of be like one of those suits, not uniform detectives, but suit detectives. I investigated everything from robberies to burglaries to assault shootings to you name it. And then I got tapped to go back to the undercover unit again, where I ended my career going after gun trafficking, weapons, drugs, all kinds of international and national drug traffickers with the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. I actually, for the last 5+ years, I worked for the federal government through the task force. It's called the Violent Crime Task Force with the ATF. So that's a pretty much snapshot. And then I was a hostage negotiator for about 22, 23 years.
Again, it's impressive to me as someone who's in education. Clearly, I'm not working on the streets. So, and you have your podcast, which is the Crime Dog podcast, that focuses on issues within law enforcement, issues kind of surrounding law enforcement, some things that are happening that affect law enforcement and how law enforcement can do their job, right? So that's basically what your podcast is addressing. So that's what you chose to do in your retirement, which
that's cool. Yeah,
it is cool. It is cool. And you guys have a pretty nice number of subscribers. So obviously you're reaching people who are concerned about these issues. And also there's people who aren't concerned about them and just want to give you flack. So either way, you're affecting something, right? So I think it's impressive. I think it's great that you do it. Now, I came across it just because I know one of the people you work with from a long time ago. And when I started watching it, I thought to myself, like, I want the law enforcement perspective. Like, I want that angle, because Katie can talk from like the clinical, therapeutic,
right.
She's got some
survivor perpetrator. I work
survivor,
with both, but yeah.
And I also want to say, Johnny, that I got a mouth like a trucker, so I'm probably going to swear more than once.
She's not. Yeah, she's
more than once.
Yeah,
just comes naturally to me. It's a sign of genius, by the way, just so you know. So Katie's got that perspective. I started this, as I told you in an email, I started this out of a group that I co-lead at work that's for DV victims and survivors.
Yeah.
That I got involved with because of my own personal experiences, which have been spoken about in past episodes. We don't need to go into those. But some of the questions that I have for you come from my personal experience, but then also what I know is going on right now with some of the people that I work with in my group. And there are questions I don't have the answer to for them, because I'm not law enforcement. So let's begin. And the best place to begin is at the start. So your career spanned 30 years.
Mhm.
Now let's start with this. From a law enforcement perspective, what constitutes domestic abuse?
So that, well, domestic abuse from a law enforcement perspective usually would have to be in the form of, in most instances, physical abuse, where we would enforce it. That would be where one or more individuals were either physically assaulted. And I say most because sometimes it could be a threat, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a hands-on crime. So it could be a threat, and that could be a form of harassment. So that's where we would take it from law enforcement, where people actually broke crimes and they were going to be arrested for that. I will tell you, since I was going to be on your podcast, I came out in 1993, and that was, and trust me, I'm not trying to be funny here, but it was right around that O.J. Simpson time.
Yeah.
And because of that crime in California, that really changed domestic laws nationally, and the way we report them. So full disclosure, because that's how we run things, right? We always say at the Crime Dog podcast, we shoot it down the middle, right? When I was a young kid on the job at 23, patrolling the streets of Rochester, there'd be times when we would be like, okay, separate, you go your way, he goes his way. And we would turn to whoever was the primary aggressor and say, don't come back. And 9 times out of 10, it worked. That 1 time out of 10, it didn't work. And that was a very dangerous situation because somebody could have gotten killed. I'm using these terms, they and somebody, not trying to be woke in 2024. I say they and somebody because not every single perpetrator was the male.
Yeah.
In some instances, we had females that were the primary aggressors.
Mm-hmm.
So back in 93, 94, 95, 96, 90, when I was on the streets, we would have instances where we would separate, and be like, okay, come on, enough's enough. Kind of like almost, now again, when I talk, I'm not trying to be funny, almost like a referee, right? Okay, stop, you go to your corner, and let it cool off, and cooler heads will prevail tomorrow.
Right. A lot of mediation. Yeah.
That doesn't work today. That doesn't work today.
And can I interject for 1 second?
Yeah.
Which you also find I do quite often. This actually bleeds into the next question I had for you, which was, over the course of your career, and I'm glad you brought up the OJ thing, and I'm glad you say that it changed the laws. I was going to say to you or ask you, did you see a change in perception of what domestic abuse and violence was over that span? Because I can see how back in the 90s and back in the 80s, back in the 70s, that if there was a domestic call, if anybody really called or if anybody was sent out, sometimes they treated it like family matter, right? This is a family matter, like, and I don't think, and I do think OJ and what happened with that situation did change the perception of it. So that was my question to you. Did you see? And obviously you did, because you said you would go sometimes be like, okay, you go, calm down, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's changed. For lack of a better phrase, I think it's taken more seriously now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's funny. Well, yeah, and the one way New York State did that, and I applaud in that time frame in the early 90s, what they did was they did more accountability, more police accountability. Okay. And where the accountability happened was, it wasn't just, hey, you go your way, they go your way. One party goes one way, the other party goes the other. What they did was, it was the documentation which was important, right? So now we began a paper trail. So New York State basically had domestic forms that we filled out. So if a crime was not committed, but a domestic incident had occurred and it didn't rise to the level of a crime, they still wanted us to document that we were at the house, that so-and-so was involved, party A, party B was involved. There's a short little narrative portion of it. There was check boxes on the form that actually had referrals for one or the both parties to utilize relative to, and we'll get into it, pretty much what Willow does today, right? So yeah, I mean, I think the way it positively went forward was the documentation, because the way we did it prior to that was there was really no documentation. We used to have these little cards, and we have FACET in our police department. FACET stands for Family and Crisis Intervention Team. It's an acronym. And we would fill out those little cards, but they went to a unit, put in a file, and they were tough to find. New York State had a whole regulatory program where they were supposed to be filed, how we access them, and how we reference them in the future.
Okay, so then also too, when you started doing this documentation, that is probably when you started to see, hey, we've gone to this house 5 times in the past 6 months, right? Or so then there started being repeat incidents. And then I would think you would keep an eye on that. And then that's another question too. So a lot of them.
Okay.
When it comes to what can be, when you say like the major aggressor, right? And take this person out of it, whatever. Now we're in the days, or now we have, orders of protection, stay away orders, restraining orders. I want to ask this. Is there a difference between an order of protection, a restraining order, and a stay away order? Or are they all the same thing?
Listen, I got a 520 my SAT, okay, and I'm not a legal scholar. There really isn't. There really isn't. I mean, an order of protection is issued by the judge, it's issued by the court, and they're enforceable. Now we have, I'm not going to get into it, but I would just say pretty much they're all the same.
Okay. Because when I've spoken to other people, because I had against my ex-husband an order of protection.
Yeah.
That was, and the reason I asked this is because of people that I know currently who are in crisis, and they don't know if they have enough to go get, an order restraining. So like mine was automatically issued because a crime had been committed. Right. So that was issued by the police. Yeah. Now, somebody else who is in an abusive situation, you can go through family court for an order of protection, but that means that person needs to go down to family court, fill out the thing or get an attorney and have an attorney do it. But a lot of times people in these situations can't get an attorney because they can't afford one, or they're kept from resources to be able to get an attorney. So are those the two avenues? One being issued automatically by the police and family court?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if things have changed since I left a year ago, but I know that the orders of protection are issued by a judge, by the court. The stay away orders that are issued by police departments, I'm not sure of the RPD if policy has changed, but the RPD pretty much leaves it up to the courts to determine who issues what. There are smaller police departments, I'm sure, around New York State that may have their own, what you will refer to as a stay away order. I don't know how those are enforced, Right. So, but when we have a court order issued by a judge, like an order of protection, we can arrest people for violating that order of protection.
It happened in my situation. And another thing about it, because I didn't know anything about any of this stuff, right? And so another thing I know about orders of protection in New York State is that once they are issued, they are also reported to the border and to other police, like state police. And I only know that because one time I got pulled over for speeding in Cape Vincent, and I had my children with me. And I gave him my license, whatever, and he came back to the car and he said, I have to ask you if so and so is in this car with you.
Yeah.
And I said, what? Like I didn't understand. And he was
Yep.
like, well, on file attached to my
Mhm.
name, is the order that I had against him.
Yeah, a side note, which is interesting, is I had a couple that were going through a lot of this dynamic. She had an order of protection against him, and you know this, Johnny, and then all of a sudden the next day we love each other again and everything's fine. And so those two are going over the border to enjoy a day in Canada, and he's arrested because
Yeah.
there's an order of protection and he's in the car with her, and they don't care what you're saying at that point, even though, oh no, we made up.
Well,
No.
I'll make two comments based on what you just said. First comment is, we put it in a system called NICEBIN, and I think my beginning stages of Alzheimer's, I forget what the acronym is for. It's like New York State. It's basically an identification information network, and that NICEBIN computer is then shared throughout the country with other police departments. So that's how they know about that. So there's a central computerized system that when our personnel, our staff put things like that in our computer in New York State, they get sent to every state in the country. So that's how he knew about that. That's number one. Number two, Katie, what you said, I had as a young officer, and I too numerous to count, when I was in a domestic or being sent to from 911 to a domestic. I've gone in first one in the house prior to backup because you had to do that, because in one particular instance, the female was getting beat up so bad. And her husband was on top of her. I mean, just really beating her. I had to go and I couldn't wait for backup. And I went in there, and of course, I had to engage him. As I engaged him, she turned on me, jumped on my back.
Yeah.
For basically trying to subdue him for assaulting her. So that's very common.
Yep.
That was this is amazing because these are so these go along with the questions that I already wrote down. Going into a scene, you reporting to a scene, not knowing what you're going to find, with which sometimes I would think you were at risk.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't know if it is just, you don't know if the person has a weapon.
Yeah.
You don't know if they're going to just take any old household implement and use it as a weapon. And also too, was there any particular instance that stood out in your mind when you started doing this documentation and you started filing it? Like, did you ever see in the course of when you were still in this part of your job an instance where you took the person out of the home or whatever, and then you're back again, and one that really like stood out to you where it ended tragically, where like you had taken this person out? I mean, like, I don't really know what the numbers are. I know they're soaring lately, of spouses or partners dying at the hands of these people after an order has been issued or after they've been to the house numerous times. Anything like that ever happened in Rochester that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, not with me specifically. Not with me specifically, but my coworkers had gone to houses where they had responded multiple times, or we had, right, as a group, because even though geographically you're assigned to an area when you're a young patrol officer, what ends up happening is you go to where 911 sends you, right? So sometimes the officers that work that area are not readily available. So they send other cops from other geographical areas to go there. So collectively, we as a shift have been to a house, for example, multiple times. But not one instance stands out, but other officers that I had worked with, we've had discussions and roll call. Yeah, 123 ABC Street, went there last night for those that weren't working. I know it was a chronic call for domestic violence. Last night, the male had went a little bit too far. Female is now deceased. Those discussions were had. Me personally, I don't have a specific example to give you. But yes, I've been involved in discussions and conversations where some of these incidents have ended tragically.
You know, Johnny, yes, unfortunately, I was going to ask you this. In my field, one of the signs that when we're working with folks that are still involved in the dynamic is, the gender doesn't matter, but the forcefulness of the male, there's more power there. By the time, and I'm just curious if this is the same in your experience, by the time they come to me, and if they're telling me there's choking involved, our numbers show that by the time we're there, the likelihood or the increased possibility of there being a fatality increases. And we really push at getting people to get out of that environment once we've reached that point. Did you find that that was similar in that when things escalated to choking, that you were looking at a more volatile situation?
So I would say the short answer to that question is yes. The little longer answer to that question is regardless if it was choking, any type of hands-on, even verbal abuse, but hands-on, it's, they're going to apologize. They're going to say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That's the perpetrator, of course. And if we use your example, whether it's a male, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. Get out, because my message to the people that are watching this that may be getting abused as we record this, get out. It's not going to be a one-time thing.
Yeah.
True men don't put their hands on women.
Right.
True men do not do that. Real men that are raised right don't put their hands on women. Now, that's not to say, and I got to do full disclosure here, right? I'm not talking about the instances where men are being abused and defending themselves. That's a totally different dynamic. In your specific example with a male perpetrator and a female victim, I talk directly to that female victim to say, listen, get out.
Yeah.
Get out. It's not a one-time thing. Don't listen to him. Don't say, I love you. It's never going to happen again. I was drinking last night. Guess what? It will not be a one-time thing. The longer you go into that relationship, the more violent it's going to get. So today was a choking or a grabbing. Tomorrow is a punching. And then it just continues to escalate from there. That's my message to your viewers.
Yeah.
And another thing too, and I read this somewhere, I think it was it's in a book I have, I was drinking last night. No, it's not the drinking. The drinking just exacerbates it. It's not the drinking. That's not the underlying cause of the behavior. So when people use those excuses, I had a bad day, I was drinking, that, again, a message to the viewers, no, the behavior's already there. It has nothing to do with these like external influences, and that's where you find spouses, partners will take the gender out of it, walking on eggshells every day because they're not sure what's going to set the person off, what it's going to be. It's always going to be something. And so, once it has risen to the level of physical abuse, it's not going to stop. And we've seen it happen time and time again where, how many news stories I beat this drum a lot. How many news stories do we have to hear where spouse is dead, had the order, or he was out of the house, or she was out of the house. We hear this more with male and female, but, and she's dead, so, okay. So that's a good message. Because like I said, some of the questions I have for you are for people that I know right now that are trying to find a way to get out.
Yep.
And Katie and I have talked about this, so many times people in these situations, they're paralyzed, right? Like they don't know the first step to take. They don't know where to go. They don't think people are going to believe them. That's another one. Some people are hesitant to go to, the police because they think the police are going to be like, okay, we got another one. And I haven't found that. I did not find that with what happened to me. I found absolute okay, because in the town of Amherst, where I live, there's a domestic violence unit that is staffed by detectives. So there's a whole, not a lot of maybe not a lot of smaller towns have that, but we do here. And that probably
That's interesting. I wonder why, if it's strictly because of numbers or you know, yeah.
A lot
And
of
the
time
town of
it's
Amherst
funding
is pretty
too. A lot of
large.
time it's funding. A lot of, oh,
Funding,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, not to interrupt you, Alan, but a lot of
Oh,
times
no, no, no.
in smaller departments, Katie, a lot of it is funding.
Mhm,
Allocating the resources that you don't have is very difficult, you know.
mhm.
But Alan, continue because I actually want to address what you said because you're making some great points.
Okay, so okay, because like I said, when I went, I was well, okay, I'll tell you the whole story. So like my ex-husband put a tracking device on my car,
Mhm,
right? That was found at the insistence of my attorney, was found by a
mhm,
mechanic
mhm,
when I was at a work conference. And so when it was found, I was like, holy shit. And so she's like, go to the police as soon as you get home, like when you get home from your work conference. So I was in Syracuse, drove back home, and I'm driving to the police department feeling like a sitting duck because the
mhm,
thing is still active, right? And so I
mhm,
walk in to the town of Amherst police, and you walk in, you talk to the person who's right at the desk, and I'm like, I don't know who to talk to. Like, I got this. Like, I had it like in this like black bag. I'm like, I got this thing. And so they brought out a policeman. And as I was talking to this gentleman, this policeman, my ex-husband was texting me, and the text said, don't do what I think you're doing. You
mhm,
better not be where I think you are.
mhm.
And I showed it to the cop. Like, I was like, and that guy was all action. I mean, like, he like took the tracking device, he filled out the thing. You'll be hearing from this detective, immediate. And so it was taken so seriously, right? Like I wasn't made to feel, well, why is your husband tracking you? Right? Like, what are you doing? Like I
Hysterical or,
wasn't,
yep.
I wasn't made to feel that way. They like fully like shot into action. So that's why I felt like incredibly supported. I have heard stories where, people are like, well, they're not going to believe me. I'm not even going to go. Like, what's the point? Blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's like that anymore. Okay. Like, I think that's from the days of like the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? Where it was kind of put on the woman, if you want to say in a traditional male female. I don't feel that anymore. I feel that this is to me, Johnny, and the way I feel about it in this country. We have several epidemics going on in this country, as we know. I mean, you guys in one of your episodes even talked about the opioid crisis and fentanyl. I feel domestic violence is an epidemic in this country. I do. And I feel it should be treated as such. Okay, so you said you wanted to address some of the comments that I made.
Yeah,
Maybe not. Maybe
there's a
not do
lot
so.
to digest there. So let's start at the top. First of all, for your viewers, where they are being victimized by somebody that puts a tracker on the car, that's called unlawful surveillance, which is illegal. Okay, so as a detective, I would put trackers on people's cars, but those people were gun runners. They were massive drug traffickers. So even I just couldn't walk up to their car when they were sleeping at night and tuck a tracker underneath their car. I had to get a court order, which was basically approval from a judge. It was a physical search warrant that I got because even though I had quote unquote seized the car for the 30-second it took our techs to put the device underneath the car, it's still a seizure. We're still taking possession of that car regardless of how long it takes. So in the civilian world, as we call it, what your husband did, it's called unlawful surveillance, and it is a crime. So anybody that does find trackers underneath their vehicles that they don't want there, um, you have an issue and you can take that up with the police department. That's number one. Number two, the one thing I do want to stress to your listeners, especially those that are currently being victimized, you're going to feel alone. You're going to feel lonely. You're going to feel like there's going to be nobody there for you. But what you don't realize is you do have support systems around you. You do have people that love you. And that could be in the form of friends, family, coworkers. If you feel that you don't have anybody to talk to, you have to at least take that first step to try. And the very least, I'm sorry, the very last resort on if there is no crime, if there is no crime, call the police department. They will be there for you. So I just want to be clear. If a crime isn't committed, but you're feeling like you're being abused emotionally, especially. There are services available to you. People that the police officers, the young cops can come to your house and they will give you services and they will point you in the right direction if you do not have that support system around you. And that's important to understand because in 2024, to talk about another piece of what you said, in 2024, whether you have cops that agree, disagree, believe, don't believe, I'm talking about believing the victims.
Mhm.
The liability now in 2024 is so high, civil liability, where failure to act, they're going to get sued. These young kids that work the street now, and I call them kids because they're more than half my age now. It's a term of endearment. But these young coppers, these young kids that work the streets, the liability, ladies, is too high for them. They don't want to get sued civilly. So they will point people in the right directions, whether they believe them or don't believe them.
Okay.
Yeah. Good to know.
That brought up another question. Okay. Back to now, when you said like when you could put a tracker on somebody's car, it was because you had a court order and this and that. How do you feel these days about air tags, trackers being able to be bought off of Amazon.com? The Spy Outlet, we have one here in Buffalo, the Spy Outlet that sells this shit. They don't, I mean, why is this readily available? And, air tags were made for a certain purpose. We all know people are using them for different purposes. Okay. I have a fundamental aversion to the fact that these items are readily available. And in the days where stalking has kind of shot through the roof,
Yeah.
and social media and everybody putting their shit all over the place so everybody knows everything.
Yep.
How do you feel about those items being sold to anybody who wants to buy them? They don't have to disclose their purpose for buying it.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about the rise of social media in relation to stalking, domestic abuse, violence?
Yeah, well, the first part of that is I think there are positive uses for air tags. I think there are positive uses for the Spy Outlet relative to the tracking systems. For example, you may have an elderly grandpa or a dad who you feel is kind of losing their fastball and maybe not go with directions anymore. And you may have spent a weekend looking for them because they went to the OTB, or when you went to OTB, they weren't at the OTB. Now you don't know where the hell they are, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody puts a tracker on grandpa's car or grandma's car because they still want to drive and you don't want to limit their mobility, I don't have a problem with that because if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're putting an air tag in your wife's purse or your husband's wallet because they are losing things, I don't have a problem with that. But again, when you morph into the negative uses of those items, the negative uses of technology, that's why, especially in New York State, you're talking about stalking laws, you're talking about unlawful surveillance. So there are ways to fight and combat it. So I just want to tell your viewers and your listeners that there are ways to have the unwanted air tag that was put inside of whatever your luggage, your purse that you did not want there. You have avenues to address it with the police department.
Okay. Because I will tell you this, when the tracking device was located on my vehicle, a couple of months before, because I was disentangling myself from this union. So we were still legally married, but separated. A couple of months before, I had taken my car, which was a lease, and I had turned it in early and for a different lease that moved the lease from both of our names just to mine. If his name would have been on the car, it wouldn't have been a crime.
Yeah, I didn't want to go deep
around that.
Yeah, I didn't want to go that deep into the weeds with the logistics and legalities. But yeah, that is an issue. Registration, vehicle ownership, property ownership.
Yep.
it does become a sketchy area. I didn't want to go that deep into legalese, but yes, you are correct.
Luckily, I did it for you because that was my fucked up situation. But like, there are good reasons for it, right? Like if you have a kid who's a young driver,
Sure.
right? Great reason to have it.
Yeah.
I just how readily available it is.
Mhm.
Now, stalking, you're saying there's stalking laws, which I say like bravo, about time. I mean, like anytime you're getting unwanted attention, like I don't care. Like Katie and I have actually had a whole episode on stalking, and it's not romantic, people, right? Like it's not romantic, it's not cute. Um, and anytime there's unwanted attention, like some people have been stalked to the point where they feel like they're a hunted animal.
Yep.
And I want to say if it's to a point where you don't feel safe, where you feel like you're being watched all the time, I would say go to your police department. I would, just to get an incident report, just to put it on the
Yeah,
books,
paper
right?
trail.
Like just to put it on the radar. That this person is following me and this is their name, and I don't. So I think that's important because I think you got to get it on the radar with someone. And I would hope that that wouldn't be considered like a nuisance call or anything. But again, we've seen those situations go so badly where person's dead. I mean, like it just things escalate so quickly these days. And in regard to your career, going from the early mid 90s, right, to last year, you saw a definite uptick in online social media, stuff like that. Did you guys, when you were still in it, did you have to kind of like broaden your skill set to include now having to look at online stuff? I mean, did you have a department within your department that was like the computer guys that did like that type of
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah, we call them the young kids. We call them the young cops because they were the ones that knew that. My partner Jay works for ATF, was fantastic with like Facebook and social media and stuff like that. So primarily, towards the end of my career, I was mainly going after major gun traffickers all over the country and drug dealers. So in that aspect, it's the same thing whether you're working the streets or you're working major investigations. There is not a dedicated unit that focuses on that. There's two
Right.
prongs to your question. We have a lot of young guys and girls that are very, very well versed in social media and all the medias. However, I will promote one place that is absolutely fantastic in Rochester. It's called MCAC. And it's the Monroe County, it's a crime analysis center. And they are phenomenal. They are social media wizards. 95% of them are what we refer to as civilians. They're non-sworn cops, but there are some cops from RPD in Monroe County that Sheriff Baxter sends to the unit to assist. But Dave Phelps, the director of that unit, does a great job in having his staff stay on top of all the technology. So the answer to that question is twofold. Yeah, you have these young coppers that are fantastic. But when you get guys like me that weren't so savvy in social media, you can lean on MCAC. And MCAC is just the Rochester acronym. In Buffalo, I think it's called ECAC because that's Erie County. But there's most bigger municipalities like Buffalo, like Rochester, like Syracuse have units in them that do focus on researching social media sites, and they're fantastic at it.
Well, I think these days you almost have to. And that's not even really in regard to just domestic violence. I mean, just with what you were doing toward the end of your career, everything's discoverable
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
And that's why we need these people who are so savvy at it,
Yeah.
because they know the back doors. They know the avenues to take to find, they can find like ghost posts that have been taken down. They can find
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
And most of these predators are, if they have the opportunity to be impulsive, it's going to happen. So, that's why that can be really a good tool to track them down because they're often misinformed in regard to how anonymous they can be.
Katie, you made a good point. You made a good point. I want to rewind to. You use the term paper trail, which is a great line. And talking to your viewers, what for law enforcement, what we do, we say a paper trail, and going back, combining what Alan had said, an incident report. So in police legalese or in police vernacular, we have a crime report where a crime was actually committed. Then we have an incident report where something happened, but it didn't rise to the level of a crime. So basically combining both of your statements, when Alan said go into the police department, and said, hey, ask for an incident report, you could demand that. And you could actually demand that. And if you get into a piss and match or an argument with the young officer behind the desk who's too lazy to do an incident report for you, because they literally take 30 seconds, 2 minutes, just ask for a supervisor. They'll get you an incident report. But you had faintly said in the background paper trail, which was fantastic, Katie, because that's the beginning phases of what the paper trail starts at, is possibly an incident report. And it may rise to a level of a crime, so that's definitely good advice for your listeners.
Yeah, I send clients all the time, even if they're like, well, I don't know where to begin. And I said, just get it logged in that this is happening. And I have never seen it not be an advantage. It's because then you've got something else. I kind of off topic, Johnny, but I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
So I wouldn't say it's equal to spousal abuse, but how often would you see, because we use the term domestic violence in regard to anything in the household. So, and it's just not spousal abuse. I working in child mental health for years, I saw a lot of that. Did you have experience like that? Was that common? Was it, what was your experience with seeing different levels of domestic violence in the home, whether it was children? I often worked with children who were abusive to their parents as well. So I would see that too. Would you call child abuse a domestic as well?
Yeah, 100%. That's why, most people think, well, as soon as people say domestic violence, they think of a big burly man beating up a small woman, right? So domestic violence comes in a ton of different forms. It could be male, female. It could be male, male, female, male. I mean, it could be female on male. It could be children, adults. It could be elder abuse. I mean, you name the dynamic, that's domestic abuse, okay? Because if the abuse occurs, then you have the different, range of genders that could be violators of it, right? Yeah, I did. And I'll be full disclosure, right? I hated investigating those crimes. They were very difficult for me. But it was my job. And I could think of several cases that I had. Those were the most difficult investigations that I've done. I mean, I've been involved in, you name the crime. I mean, and I'm not going to get too graphic here, but I tell people this. People always say, Johnny, tell me the worst thing that you ever seen. And I tell people all the time, look at the things that my eyes have seen and my ears have heard. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. So I don't ever discuss that. So, but I will tell you that generically or generally speaking, child abuse, we have a whole unit dedicated to that. Those men and women and those detectives that do those units or work those units, I say they do God's work. Because I had instances where I have interviewed and interrogated perpetrators of child abuse in every form you could possibly think of, not to the extent of some of my brothers and sisters, but I have done it because when I came on and the units really weren't as prevalent as they are now. And the funding wasn't there for those units. Now there's government funding, state funding, and things like that. So they have actual units, actual buildings like a Bavona, where people have the ability to go there and utilize the services that are provided to them, either privately or publicly funded. But those investigations, Katie, were the worst ever. Sitting across in an interrogation room from somebody that had done X, Y, and Z to a child, you have, as a man that was raised right, you have to know that this is your job. You have to perform. Basically, I had to be an actor because my instincts are telling me, oh my God, I want to jump over the table. But the professional detective in me says, let's do this right. Let's make sure this happens the right way. Let's get a confession from this guy. Let's be his friend. Let's schmooze him. It's very difficult from a detective standpoint to interview and interrogate perpetrators of crimes, not only against, vulnerable women, but also against children. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would go vigilante if I was in your. I don't have the patience or the
Yeah.
filter or whatever. So it's
Yeah.
probably a good thing I never went into law enforcement, because I would have been the one that was being investigated by Internal Affairs, because I would have taken matters into my own hands. I don't
Yeah.
I don't have that. I wouldn't
It's
be able to hold
difficult.
myself.
It's difficult.
For me, and I hear you, Johnny, we all have our limits, and, I worked in the field as a mental health professional for years in the homes, and, it's funny, I had a lot of compassion for people that would take accountability and be very lost in their behavior. Even, if it was children, my big ones were children and animals. I had a really hard time with those. And I guess it goes to that kind of helpless,
Mhm.
why are you going after something you can't even fight back, right? So if they were taking accountability and wanting help, um, I could get in there with that. But it was, I don't know if I'm sure you ran into this, the smug audacity of this self-righteous, um, like I can do that. That's mine. I can abuse that. This is this sense that it was okay. That's where I
Yeah,
couldn't do it.
you're 100% right. The smugness, and usually the smugness was, and again, let's just call it like we see it. Most of these incidents, I say most, disclaimer, are male, right? The male part of it, the arrogance of the male to say, yeah, this is quote unquote almost like my property. My family is my property.
Mhm.
That's not a real man, number one. Number
Yeah.
two, I had an instance uh, where you're talking about right now, just keeping with the scope of the conversation. I still remember the kid's name. I still have the Christmas card that he helped. Right, he was under the age of 7, and he was abused by the dad with a cord that he cut from an iron, like an ironing board iron.
Yeah.
Um, and those cords
Yep.
and the scars that the young child had on him and the defenselessness. I still have that card in
Yep.
my police files after I cleaned out my desk. And that was one of the instances, one of the cases that I had investigated as a young detective, that I wasn't going to stop until I had enough evidence to
Mhm.
arrest him legally. And it happened. We put that away, and I got the child to go full custody with grandma, and grandma,
Good.
the kid gave me a Christmas card. And to this day, it still means something to me. But yeah, you're right. You're 100% right relative to the egotistical arrogance of it. But I want to make one point. I want to make one point. I want to tell your listeners, trust your gut, right? Trust your gut if you're in a relationship. If it doesn't feel right in here, tell up here, because down here is always right. Trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. So if in your gut you feel that you're in a relationship that you're like, this doesn't really seem right, it's probably not right. It's not right. So get out of it. Get out of it and do whatever you can to help yourself get out of it. Because if you have children, young children with this person, those children are going to be affected. Get out as soon as you can. And there are resources available to help you get out.
Yep.
And that I'm glad that you said that, because it was another one of my questions. Johnny, we're so in sync. Like, it just, you're leading me to like all my next questions. In this day and age, especially with social media,
Mhm.
I believe that, we got to hit the younger generation, right? Like, we got to get them with like somehow in the schools or something, healthy relationships and what they look like, right? Healthy
Mhm.
patterns of behavior and what they look like. Here are some things, because there's dating violence among teens,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not just restricted, folks, to people in romantic relationships, spouses, partners. No, there's
Yeah.
dating violence among teens. There was just an
Mhm.
article I read the other day
Mhm.
that it was a teenage boyfriend that killed his girlfriend with the help of like his cousin or some
Mhm.
shit, and they buried her. Like, I mean, so the teens, and because they're so like, I don't know how old your kids are, Johnny. Mine are 21, 20, and 17, but cell phones are basically surgically attached to their hands. Um, these kids aren't not 100% living in the real world because they have so much coming at them
Yeah.
in the online social media world that things are starting to get skewed. And I feel like they need some good, solid information from someone like a Katie or someone like a Johnny or someone like a survivor to say things to them like, trust your gut. Okay. No, this isn't the way a healthy relationship should go when you're dating and you're young, to give them some like guardrails, because everything just seems to be all over the place now, especially with cell phones and all this shit, that I don't
Yeah, I
think
think
they know healthy boundaries
the
anymore.
baselines are really skewed in regard
Yes,
to, what to expect in a relationship. Um, and a good one. Yeah. What does it look like?
right. And that's okay.
Well,
So I guess the word I'm looking for is boundaries.
A baseline. Like, what's the baseline for a good relationship? Because it is. The thing is coming out of kid. Yeah, I would agree.
so I think so. There's a couple of things, and I have a great example for you. So the first thing I want to address is this. Usually, in situations like that, kids that come from domestic abuse, they're raised under the roof of a domestic abuse. I always say you have two roads, right? You're either going to go down that same road that you saw, or you're going to say, I hated it so much, I'm going to be the best parent there is known to man and raise my children in the
Yeah,
opposite
I'd say
direction.
the same thing. Either you
Katie
become,
says the same thing.
yeah,
Advocate, you're
yeah,
gonna repeat it, or you're gonna
it's
be an
so true.
advocate
Yeah,
against it.
it's
Yeah,
one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
So if you will oblige me for about 30 seconds,
absolutely.
I'm glad both of you mentioned something because this speaks to social media and this also speaks to the younger generation. She is a social media influencer. Her name is Brianna LaPaglia. They call her Brianna Chicken Fry. She is part of a network called BFF. She's on a podcast with Dave Portnoy and Josh Richardson. She was in a multiple year relationship with mega country superstar Zach Bryan. He's internationally, obviously nationally known, but he sells out stadiums. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She was in a relationship with him. My suggestion to your audience, go to the BFFs podcast. That's BFFs, like best friends. Go to that podcast. I think it's episode 198, but just check out where it talks about Brianna and Zach Bryan's relationship. She's 25 years old, the same age as my daughter. This young woman, and I apologize if I call her a kid because but this young woman is so ahead of her time. I hope that she becomes an advocate for that young generation of domestic abuse, because what she has described thus far in the things that she said, it's all emotional and domestic abuse from Zach Bryan. Okay. Now, I tend to believe her like 99%. And I say 10 because that's the detective in me. But I believe her because Zach's not coming out. Zach's not defending himself because he knows he's wrong. This young woman has an unbelievable and uncanny ability to discuss generally, because she's not giving a lot of specifics, generally what she went through. And I think she is going to become such a powerful young voice for not only her generation of young women, but I think she's going to eventually become a powerful voice for domestic violence and domestic abuse in this country. She has a hell of a social media following. She's got a great head on her shoulders. She is unbelievable. And I refer your listeners to that podcast because it is social media, it's young relationships, and they definitely have a connection. That BFS podcast has a connection to that young generation. And I was fascinated in watching it because of my detective background, because of what I did for 30 years. And, I was a hostage negotiator. I have a degree in psychology. I also worked at St. Joseph's Villa as a counselor of young abused kids. It was just a really, really cool thing to watch in a positive way. I'm very saddened what Brianna went through, but for her to come out on the other side and now be an advocate, it is unprecedented. It's unprecedented. I'm not sure if you women had seen that or you're familiar with her, but it's a heck of a podcast. Your listeners and you guys should give it a listen.
I heard about that situation. And of course, one of the first things that I thought, brave of her to come out because he is who he is, which gets us into the conversation of, celebrity being accused or fingered or, named in this type of behavior, which we've seen happen to quite a few people over the last couple of months, right? And that was actually one of the questions I had. When these things happen and they involve big names, it seems kind of polarizing because either they jump to the defense of the person, because I don't know, maybe they're on their payroll, maybe they're part of their entourage, maybe they're doing spin control, damage control for their reputation. Or people are like, of course he did. Of course he did. He's so-and-so. Of course he would think he could do that. Katie and I talk about in terms of abuse, it's a power and control thing, right? People would look at Zach Bryan and be like, good old country boy, love his music, down to his roots, blah, 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 that whole kind of persona. But she came out and absolutely laid it out. Now there's going to be people who are like, oh, she's looking for a payday. She's looking for money, right? She has her own money. Okay. She's got her own. People know her for her, not because she was just Zach Bryan's girlfriend. But that's a slippery slope too. Now, the fact that he's not coming out and defending himself, if he immediately did that, then at least he'd be putting something into the conversation, right? He's not doing that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you said that, Ellen, because here she is, 25 years old. His attorneys had reached out to her. And because I kind of went deep in the weeds on this because of my background.
We go in the weeds all the time.
So Zach's team offered her $12 million to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. They offered her 12, I think it was $12 million. That was the cap. She turned it down. And her exact reasons were, I want to be an advocate. I want to be a voice. She was such a mature person because she said, you know what? If he tries to defend himself, then I'm going to release videos, audio. I am going to tell it all. She spoke in generalities because she's like, I care for him. I care for his well-being, but I'm speaking in generalities now because I want to protect future women that are involved in these incidents, and also future women that may decide to get in a relationship with this guy. Maybe he'll change, maybe he won't. But they did offer her a large sum of money to keep her mouth shut, and she turned it down, which I thought was equally impressive. It was life-changing money.
Well, and that shows that she does want to be an advocate. And that goes along the lines of, the court case that I've talked about a couple of times in our podcast, which is happening in France. I don't know if you heard about this, but it's about the man who drugged and had other people rape his wife for 10 years. No, I don't know if you heard about that one.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It's pretty insane. Like over the course of a decade, there was something like 72 men that he brought into the home to rape his wife while she was unconscious. They were married for 40 years. She chose at the beginning of this trial to give up being anonymous. She wanted to and she wanted it to be public.
Yep.
Because she wanted people to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was her way of being like, no, I want this out there. I want people to know. And and this has psychologically wrecked her and her kids and her, but she didn't want to be anonymous. Kind of like Brianna not taking the money. Right? No, I'm not going to shut up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to shut up. And so that's another important point. And this is another important point about domestic abuse and violence. And like how you said at one point, Johnny, you're not alone, right? Use your voice. Like, use your voice. She must have had somebody at her door. Use your voice, because if you stay quiet, and that's why this podcast is called Living Out Loud, because in the very, very first episode, my co-host in the beginning said that she was tired of living quiet and tired of living small. And if you don't raise your voice and you don't open your mouth, it's going to continue.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think people like Brianna, and I think that, especially young women like Brianna, who have a voice, who have a platform, who have very a positive message, even though it's a negative situation, they have a very positive message to give to people. Like, we're here for you. There's people out there for you going through the same things you are. And regardless of your social stature, whether you're a mega superstar like he is, and like she really is too. I mean, she is just off the charts with her popularity. People go through things. People, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human. It doesn't matter, the socioeconomic status doesn't matter, how popular you are or how famous you are. Everyone still has those basic problems that happen within the four corners of your house and under your roof. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how big your house is. It doesn't matter if you're in a mansion or a shack. You still have problems. Most problems are the same thing that superstars have, that people with no money have. I mean, that's one thing, like I said, I mean, I want your viewers and your listeners to know that there's people out there, people like yourselves, who are doing God's work, putting the message out there. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of avenues for them to go down where they will have opportunities to get help. They just need to take that first step to go and ask for it sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they do. And sometimes that can be really difficult. Well, thank you. I do have a favor to ask you though, Johnny.
Sure.
My oldest son loves the way you sign off your podcast.
Yeah.
Do you want to sign off with that?
So can I just tell you the reason why I sign off like that? I mean, if you guys don't know and your audience doesn't know.
I do, because I watch, but go ahead.
So my wife, speaking of doing God's work, takes care of her older brother, who's 2 years older than she is. He's 55, going to be 56. He's special needs, and his name's Frankie, and she takes care of him full time. And I sign off, and he's nonverbal. So when I sign off, I say, hey, thanks for listening to the Crime Dog podcast. We appreciate you checking into this episode. Stick with us for future episodes. But if you can't make it, like my brother-in-law, Frankie Grassi, says, who cares? And he's nonverbal, so he wouldn't say any of that. But I do that as an homage to him. I love him so much.
Yeah, like my son he just loved that.
Yeah.
So okay, so when we end, we normally I've been forgetting to do it lately, but I always end with telling people that they matter. You matter, especially if you're in a situation such as that, a domestic abuse situation, which can make you feel isolated and disconnected and maybe doubting yourself. So you matter. And Katie, I do have a quote for this week.
Go for it.
And I feel like it goes along with this a little bit. It's Eleanor Roosevelt. Can't go wrong with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Nope.
No one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Mm-hmm.
Great quote.
Yeah.
Johnny, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Great.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Great.
I wish you guys the best of luck with your podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the best of luck with yours.
Thank you very much, ladies.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
All right, have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.